Gabriella Caldwell's trembling hands clutched the eviction notice, the cruel words blurring through her fever-induced tears as the setting sun cast long shadows across her struggling farm outside Ridgefield, Colorado. The year was 1878, and at 23, she faced losing everything her late father had built unless she could somehow harvest the wheat field and pay the bank what she owed in less than a month. The illness had come suddenly, striking her down with chills and fever just when the crops needed tending most. 3 days she'd been bedridden, and in that time the situation had gone from difficult to desperate. The bank manager, Mr. Holloway, had made his position clear: payment by July 1st or vacate the property. With no family left and few friends in this remote corner of the frontier, Gabriella had nowhere to turn. She sank back onto her sweat-soaked pillow, the room spinning around her. The small cabin felt suffocating despite the evening breeze through the open window. Her faithful dog, Scout, whined softly from his position near her bed, sensing her distress. "We'll figure something out," she whispered, though her throat burned with each word. But the truth clawed at her heart. Without help, she would lose everything. Morning broke with harsh, unforgiving light streaming through the curtainless windows. Gabriella forced herself to sit up, fighting the dizziness that threatened to pull her back down. She needed water. Medicine. And somehow, she needed to get out to that field. The floorboards creaked in protest as she shuffled toward the kitchen, each step requiring more strength than she possessed. Scout circled anxiously at her feet. When she reached the basin, she splashed tepid water on her face, then filled a cup with shaking hands. A noise from outside made her pause. The distinct sound of hoofbeats approaching. Gabriella wasn't expecting visitors, and in her experience, unexpected callers rarely brought good news. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself as the hoofbeats slowed, then stopped. Heavy boots thudded on the packed earth outside. 3 firm knocks on the door sent Scout into a barking frenzy. "Just a moment," she called out, her voice barely carrying above the dog's noise. "Scout, quiet?" With one hand pressed against the wall for support, she made her way to the door and pulled it open. The man who stood before her was tall, his broad shoulders blocking the morning sun. A worn Stetson cast shadows over a face weathered by years under the open sky. Dust covered his denim pants and cotton shirt, speaking of a long journey. "Miss Caldwell?" he asked, his deep voice tinged with concern as he took in her disheveled appearance. "Yes," she managed, trying to stand straighter despite the trembling in her legs. "Name's Vaughn Quaid. Your neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, sent me. Said you might be needing some help." Gabriella blinked, trying to process his words through her fever-fogged mind. Mrs. Peterson lived 3 miles east, a kindly widow who occasionally brought preserves and checked on her. "I don't understand," Gabriella said. "Mrs. Peterson sent you?" "Why?" Vaughn shifted his weight, removing his hat to reveal dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. His eyes, a striking blue against his sun-darkened skin, studied her with increasing worry. "Madam, you look like you ought to be in bed. May I come in and explain?" Propriety dictated she should refuse entry to a stranger, but desperation and illness weakened her resolve. She nodded and stepped back, nearly stumbling as another wave of dizziness hit her. Vaughn moved quickly, steadying her with a gentle hand on her arm. "Easy now. Let me help you." Once inside, he guided her to a chair at her small kitchen table. Scout had stopped barking but watched the newcomer warily. "I was passing through, looking for work," Vaughn explained as he poured her more water. "Mrs. Peterson said her young neighbor lady had a crop that needed harvesting but had taken ill. She was worried about you." Gabriella's hands wrapped around the cool cup. "I can't pay you, Mr. Quaid. The bank's already threatening to take everything." His expression remained impassive, though his eyes softened. "When's the payment due?" "July 1st, just over 3 weeks." She gestured weakly toward the notice on the table. "I need to sell the wheat, but I can't." Her voice broke, exhaustion and fever overwhelming her composure. Vaughn picked up the notice, scanning its contents quickly. His jaw tightened. 20 days to bring in a crop this size alone, he shook his head. That's not possible even for someone in perfect health. Which I'm clearly not, she said with a bitter laugh that turned into a cough. He set the paper down and regarded her thoughtfully. I've got 2 good hands and experience with wheat. I'll help you. But I just told you I can't pay. Room and board will do for now, he said simply. And maybe a small percentage if we bring the crop in successfully. Gabriella stared at him, searching for deception in his face but finding only straightforward determination. Men didn't offer help without expecting something in return. Her 3 years alone on the farm had taught her that lesson repeatedly. Why would you do this for a stranger? Vaughn replaced his hat and moved toward the door. Because someone once did the same for me when I had nothing. But we can discuss it later. Right now you need medicine and I need to see what I'm dealing with in that field. There's some willow bark in that jar, she said, pointing to a shelf, and the field tools are in the barn, he nodded. I'll make you tea for the fever first. Then I'll assess the field. You should rest. Too weak to argue, Gabriella watched as this strange, quiet man moved efficiently around her kitchen, heating water and preparing the bitter remedy that would help reduce her fever. His movements were purposeful but gentle, his large hands surprisingly deft with the delicate teacup. As she sipped the hot liquid, she studied him. Vaughn Quaid was somewhere in his early 30s, she guessed. His clothes were worn but clean, and he carried himself with the confidence of a man who knew his own strength but was careful with it. The gun at his hip suggested he could handle trouble, but his manner wasn't threatening. Thank you, she said when she'd finished the tea. You're welcome. Now you should lie down while I check the farm. His tone was kind but firm. Gabriella nodded and allowed him to help her back to bed. As her eyes closed, the last thing she saw was Vaughn's tall figure silhouetted in the doorway, Scout cautiously following him out. She dreamed of her father showing her how to test wheat for readiness, his patient voice explaining that timing was everything. When she woke hours later, the fever had broken somewhat, leaving her weak but clearer-headed. The cabin was quiet. For a moment, she wondered if Vaughn had been a fever dream, but then she heard movement outside. Forcing herself up, she made her way to the window. In the distance, she could see a lone figure moving methodically through the wheat field, examining plants and soil. Even from here, she could tell he knew what he was doing. Scout trotted behind him, apparently having decided the stranger was trustworthy. Evening was approaching by the time Vaughn returned to the cabin. He knocked lightly before entering, carrying a bucket of fresh water. You're looking better, he remarked. Fever's down, Gabriella nodded. A bit. I made some soup. She gestured to the pot simmering on the stove. It had taken most of her strength, but she couldn't let him do everything. Vaughn washed his hands in the basin. The wheat's in decent shape, though it needs immediate attention. Some areas are showing signs of rust, but we can save most of it. He dried his hands on a towel. I meant what I said this morning. I'll help you bring in this crop. Gabriella lowered herself into a chair. Mr. Quaid, Vaughn, he corrected. Vaughn, she continued, I appreciate your offer, but I can't accept charity, and I can't promise payment. He sat across from her, his expression serious. It's not charity, it's a business arrangement. I need work, you need help. If the crop succeeds, I get a percentage. If not. He shrugged. I was moving on anyway. There was something he wasn't saying. She could sense it, but desperation outweighed caution. The field is bigger than one man can handle alone. I've sent word to town. There are a couple of men willing to help for a day's wage when it's time for the full harvest. But the preparation, the rust treatment, clearing the irrigation, I can manage that. Gabriella studied him. You've done this before. A shadow crossed his features. My family had a farm in Kansas. Before the war, she didn't press for more. Everyone on the frontier carried stories they preferred not to tell. All right, she said finally, we have a deal. Vaughn nodded, the matter settled in his mind. Good, now you should eat and rest. You'll need your strength. I'll sleep in the barn. There's a cot in the side room, she offered. It's where my father stayed when he was alive. Something in Vaughn's expression softened. Thank you, Miss Caldwell. Gabriella, she said. If we're working together, you might as well use my name. Gabriella, he repeated, and the sound of her name in his deep voice stirred something unexpected within her. They ate in companionable silence, and for the first time in days, Gabriella felt the weight on her shoulders lighten slightly. She wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, Gabriella woke feeling marginally stronger. The fever had subsided, though exhaustion still clung to her like a heavy blanket. Through her window, she could already see Vaughn working in the field, his shirt sleeves rolled up against the early summer heat. She dressed slowly, determined to at least provide meals if she couldn't yet help with the farm work. By the time she had coffee brewing, Vaughn returned for a brief rest. "You should be in bed," he said upon seeing her at the stove. "I've spent enough time there," she replied. "Besides, I'm feeling better." He looked skeptical but didn't argue. "The rust is spreading faster than I thought. I've mixed a copper solution to treat the affected areas, but we'll need more copper sulfate from town." "There's money in the tin on the shelf," she said. "Not much, but enough for supplies." Vaughn shook his head. "I've got it covered. Save your funds for when we need to hire help for the harvest." Before she could protest, he continued, "I've cleared the main irrigation channel, but the secondary ones need work." "The recent rains have caused some flooding in the lower field," Gabriella nodded. "That happens every spring. My father built a system of small dams to control it, but I haven't been able to maintain them properly." "I found them," Vaughn said. "Clever design. I can repair what's broken." She watched him as he drank his coffee, noticing the way his eyes constantly assessed, calculated. He wasn't a man who missed details. "Why were you passing through here?" she asked suddenly. "There's nothing much beyond us except mountains and trouble." A slight smile touched his lips. "Sometimes a man just needs to keep moving." Running from something, his expression grew guarded. "Aren't we all in one way or another?" It wasn't an answer, but Gabriella recognized the boundary he'd drawn and respected it. She had her own reasons for being cautious around strangers. "I'm going into town for supplies," Vaughn said, finishing his coffee. "Anything you need," she thought for a moment. "Medicine, if you can. Dr. Miller usually has willow bark and quinine, and food," he added, glancing at her nearly empty pantry. "You're going to need strength to recover." The concern in his voice surprised her. It had been so long since anyone had worried about her welfare. After Vaughn departed with Scout accompanying him, Gabriella slowly made her way around the small farm. Despite her weakened state, she needed to see for herself what they were facing. The wheat field stretched out before her, golden green and waving gently in the breeze. It was a good stand. Her father would have been proud. But she could see the telltale reddish-brown spots of rust on some of the stalks, a disease that could destroy everything if not controlled quickly. At the edge of the field, she found evidence of Vaughn's morning work. Newly cleared irrigation ditches, carefully applied copper solution on the affected plants, and the beginnings of repairs to her father's dam system. He worked methodically and thoroughly, she noted, not cutting corners. By the time she returned to the cabin, exhaustion forced her to lie down again. She slept fitfully, waking to the sound of hoofbeats in the late afternoon. Vaughn returned with saddlebags full of supplies: medicine, food, copper sulfate, and even a newspaper from town. Scout bounded ahead of him, clearly having decided the cowboy was a friend. "Dr. Miller sent this," Vaughn said, handing her a small bottle, "for the fever. He also suggested beef broth and rest." Gabriella accepted the medicine gratefully. "Thank you. What news from town?" Vaughn's expression darkened slightly. "I ran into your banker, Mr. Holloway." Her stomach tightened. "What did he say?" "He mentioned that several people are interested in your land. Seemed surprised when I said I was working for you." Vaughn began unpacking the supplies. "He didn't think you'd be able to bring in the crop in time." "He's probably right," Gabriella admitted. "Even with your help, it's a race against time." Vaughn looked at her, determination in his eyes. "We'll make it. I've seen worse situations turn around. How can you be so sure?" He moved to the stove, beginning to prepare a simple meal. "Because I don't believe in giving up until every option is exhausted," and we have options." His confidence was contagious, and for the first time since receiving the eviction notice, Gabriella allowed herself to hope. Perhaps with this stranger's help, she might keep her home after all. As dusk settled over the farm, they ate together, discussing plans for the coming days. Vaughn would continue treating the rust and repairing the irrigation system, while Gabriella would regain her strength and handle the records and planning for the harvest. "Once you're stronger," Vaughn said, "you can help with the lighter work, but for now your job is to recover." She wanted to argue but knew he was right. The illness had taken more from her than she cared to admit. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the occasional sounds of Vaughn moving about in the side room, Gabriella wondered about the man who had appeared so unexpectedly in her life. He was clearly educated, knew farming intimately, and handled himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced hardship and survived. Yet there was a sadness about him, too, a wariness in his eyes that spoke of past wounds. Whatever had brought Vaughn Quaid to her door, Gabriella was grateful. For the first time in many months, she didn't feel entirely alone. The next week passed in a rhythm of gradual improvement. Gabriella's strength returned slowly, allowing her to take on more tasks around the farm. Vaughn worked from dawn until dusk, stopping only for meals and brief rests. He was a tireless worker, methodical and efficient. By the 10th day, the rust had been contained, the irrigation system fully repaired, and the first preparations for harvest begun. But challenges remained. "We need rain," Vaughn said one evening as they reviewed their progress. "The upper section of the field is too dry." Gabriella nodded, studying the rough map they had drawn. "There's a stream beyond the North Ridge. My father once talked about diverting it, but he never had the chance." Vaughn considered this. It would take significant work, but it might be possible. "How far is it?" "About half a mile through difficult terrain. I'll survey it tomorrow," he decided. "If we can bring water to that section, we'll increase the yield considerably." As they worked side by side, planning and problem-solving, Gabriella found herself watching Vaughn when he wasn't looking. The way his hands moved with surprising gentleness when handling delicate equipment. The thoughtful furrow of his brow when calculating measurements. The rare smile that transformed his serious face when something went right. She caught herself wondering about his past, the life he had left behind. But each time she asked a personal question, he deflected with practiced ease, turning the conversation back to the farm or to her. One afternoon, as they worked together treating the last of the rust-affected plants, Gabriella decided on a more direct approach. "You know everything about me and my situation," she said, "but you've told me almost nothing about yourself." Vaughn continued working, his back to her. "Not much to tell. I find that hard to believe. A man doesn't learn farming, engineering, and medicine without a story behind it." He straightened, wiping his brow with his forearm. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, but then he sighed. "I had a farm in Kansas, lost it during the war. Drifted west, worked ranches, took odd jobs, that's all." It wasn't all she was certain of it, but she nodded, accepting what he was willing to share. "Well, I'm grateful our paths crossed." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his gaze made her heart beat faster. "So am I." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken thoughts, until Scout barked in the distance, breaking the spell. Vaughn cleared his throat. "We should finish before sundown." Gabriella nodded, turning back to her work. But something had shifted between them, a recognition that neither was quite ready to acknowledge. That evening, a storm blew in from the mountains, bringing the rain they had hoped for, but also high winds that threatened the fragile wheat. Vaughn and Gabriella worked side by side in the downpour, securing what they could and diverting water away from the more vulnerable sections. By the time they stumbled back to the cabin, they were drenched and exhausted but triumphant. The wheat had weathered the storm, and the rain would give it the boost it needed. "Here," Gabriella said, handing Vaughn a towel and dry clothes that had belonged to her father. "You'll catch your death otherwise." He accepted them with a nod of thanks. "You should change too, I'll stoke the fire." The small cabin soon grew warm and cozy as the storm raged outside. Gabriella changed into a dry dress and wrapped a quilt around her shoulders, her wet hair hanging loose down her back. When she emerged from her room, Vaughn had the fire blazing and coffee brewing. He had changed into her father's clothes, which fit him reasonably well, though the sleeves were slightly short. His dark hair was damp and curling at the edges, giving him a younger, almost vulnerable appearance. "You're good at this," she said, sitting near the fire. "At what?" "Taking care of things, solving problems. Most men would have looked at this farm and seen only the difficulties." Vaughn handed her a cup of coffee. "Most men haven't seen what I have. After a while, you learn to focus on what can be fixed rather than what can't." "And what can't be fixed, Vaughn?" she asked softly. He stared into the fire, his expression distant. "The past." The simple answer held worlds of meaning, and Gabriella felt a surge of connection with this quiet, determined man. She too had learned to live with an unchangeable past. "No," she agreed, "but the future isn't written yet." His eyes met hers, and the intensity in them made her breath catch. "No, it isn't." In that moment, with the storm howling outside and the fire crackling between them, Gabriella realized she was developing feelings for Vaughn Quaid that went beyond gratitude. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The following days brought new challenges. The stream diversion proved more difficult than anticipated, requiring Vaughn to recruit 2 men from town to help with the heavy work. Gabriella's funds were dwindling faster than expected, but the wheat was responding well to their care, growing stronger by the day. 2 weeks after Vaughn's arrival, Mr. Holloway rode out to the farm, ostensibly to check on Gabriella's health but clearly surprised and displeased by the progress they had made. "Miss Caldwell," he said, removing his hat as she greeted him outside the cabin. "I see you've recovered from your illness." "Yes, thank you for your concern," she replied coolly. Holloway's eyes drifted to Vaughn, who was working nearby. "And you've found help?" "Mr. Quaid is my partner in bringing in this crop," she said firmly. "We will have your payment on time, Mr. Holloway." The banker's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I certainly hope so. However, you should know that Mr. Preston has made a very generous offer for this property. I would be remiss not to mention it." Vaughn approached, standing just behind Gabriella. "Mr. Preston, the cattle rancher," Holloway nodded. "He's looking to expand his grazing land." "This is wheat country," Vaughn said flatly. "Good wheat country." "Perhaps," Holloway replied, replacing his hat. "But business is business, Miss Caldwell. The offer stands if you find yourself unable to meet your obligation." After the banker departed, Gabriella's hands trembled with anger. "He wants me to fail. Preston has been trying to buy this land for years." Vaughn's jaw was set in a hard line. "All the more reason to succeed." That evening, they calculated and recalculated their timeline. The harvest would be close, dangerously close to their deadline, but possible if everything went perfectly from now on. "We'll need at least 6 men for the harvest," Vaughn said. "I know 3 who will come. Can you think of others?" Gabriella considered. "The Tanner brothers might help. They owe my father a favor." "Good. And we'll need wagons to transport the wheat to the mill immediately." They worked late into the night, planning every detail. As the lamp burned low, Gabriella found herself growing increasingly aware of Vaughn's presence, the scent of soap and sunshine that clung to him, the strength in his hands as they traced routes on their makeshift map, the intensity in his eyes when he spoke of their chances. "We should rest," she said finally, sensing that they had done all they could for now. Vaughn nodded, gathering the papers. "Tomorrow we'll start reinforcing the stream diversion. The recent rain helped, but we need to ensure it continues flowing to the dry sections." As he stood to leave, Gabriella impulsively reached out, touching his arm. "Thank you, Vaughn, for everything." He looked down at her hand, then met her eyes. "You don't need to thank me. This is our fight now, our fight." The words warmed her in ways she hadn't expected. Somehow, in the short time he'd been there, her struggle had become his as well. That night, Gabriella dreamed of standing in a fully harvested field, the golden stubble stretching around her, and Vaughn at her side, his hand in hers. When she woke, the dream lingered, leaving her with a longing she was afraid to examine too closely. Days blended into one another as they worked tirelessly. The wheat grew tall and strong, their care paying dividends in the healthy golden stalks. Gabriella regained her full strength and worked alongside Vaughn from sunrise to sunset, their partnership growing more seamless with each passing day. They rarely spoke of personal matters, focusing instead on the immediate challenges, but Gabriella found herself learning about Vaughn through observation. The way he gently treated an injured bird they found in the field, how he remembered exactly how she liked her coffee. The quiet humming when he thought no one was listening old songs from before the war. One evening, nearly 3 weeks after his arrival, Gabriella found Vaughn sitting on the porch steps, staring at a worn photograph. "May I join you?" she asked softly. He quickly tucked the photo away but nodded. "Family?" she asked, settling beside him. Vaughn was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Then my wife and son." The unexpected revelation sent a pang through Gabriella's heart. "I didn't realize you were married. I'm not anymore." His voice was tight with controlled emotion. "They died. Illness swept through our Kansas town while I was away fighting. By the time I returned, I'd lost everything." Gabriella's throat constricted. "I'm so sorry, Vaughn." "It was 8 years ago," he said, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Other times like another lifetime entirely." Instinctively, she placed her hand over his. "Is that why you keep moving?" He turned his hand to hold hers, the gesture so natural it felt like they'd done it 100 times before. "Partly. For a long time, I didn't see much point in staying anywhere. Then I started helping folks who needed an extra hand like you. It gave me purpose. And now," his eyes met hers, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. "Now I'm not so sure constant movement is the answer." The confession hung between them, loaded with unspoken possibilities. Gabriella's heart raced, aware that they were standing at the edge of something significant. Before she could respond, Scout began barking urgently from the field. Both of them stood immediately, alert to potential trouble. "Stay here," Vaughn said, reaching for the rifle he kept nearby. "No," Gabriella countered, grabbing a lantern. "It's my farm." Together they moved toward the sound, Scout's barking growing more frantic. In the dim evening light, they found a section of the new irrigation channel had collapsed, water spilling across a vulnerable part of the field. "The storm must have weakened it more than we thought," Vaughn said, already assessing the damage. "We need to divert the water immediately." For hours they worked side by side, rebuilding the channel wall with stones and packed earth. By midnight, exhausted and mud-covered, they had contained the disaster. "That was close," Gabriella said as they trudged back to the cabin. "If Scout hadn't alerted us." "We would have lost that entire section," Vaughn finished grimly. "And with it, our margin for meeting the deadline." Inside, they cleaned up in silence, the weight of how precarious their situation remained hanging over them. As Gabriella handed Vaughn a towel, their fingers brushed, and she felt that same spark of connection that had been growing stronger with each passing day. "We'll make it," she said softly. "I believe that now." Vaughn's expression softened. "So do I." Something in his voice made her look up. The intensity in his gaze sent warmth spreading through her. "Gabriella," he began, then hesitated. "Yes," he seemed to wrestle with himself before speaking. "When this is over, when your farm is secure, I was wondering if you might consider." "Consider what?" She prompted when he didn't continue, "allowing me to stay. Not as a hired hand, but as—" He trailed off, uncertainty clouding his usually confident demeanor. Gabriella's heart thundered in her chest. "As what, Vaughn?" "As someone who cares for you deeply." The words came out in a rush, as though he'd been holding them back for too long. "I know it's soon, and I know you have every reason to be cautious, but these weeks with you have awakened something in me I thought was dead." Gabriella stood perfectly still, afraid that the slightest movement might break this moment. I feel it too, she whispered, but I'm afraid. Of what? That once the crisis is past, you'll feel your debt is paid and move on, that this feeling between us is just intensity born from our circumstances. Vaughn stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. That's not what this is. I've helped many people over the years, Gabriella. I've never felt this way before. Slowly, hesitantly, he raised his hand to her cheek. The gentle touch sent shivers through her. I don't want to leave when this is over, he said quietly. For the first time in 8 years, I want to stay. Gabriella leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. I want you to stay too. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating at once. When she opened her eyes, Vaughn was looking at her with such tenderness it made her breath catch. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle, questioning at first, then deepening as she responded, her hands finding their way to his shoulders. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. We should probably focus on saving your farm before planning anything further, he said with a small smile. Gabriella laughed softly. Probably, but I'm glad we had this conversation. So am I. He reluctantly stepped back. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day. As Gabriella lay in bed that night, her lips still tingling from their kiss, hope blossomed in her chest not just for her farm, but for a future she hadn't dared imagine until now. The next days were filled with hard work and fleeting moments of connection. Stolen glances across the field. Hands touching longer than necessary when passing tools. Conversations that lasted late into the evening, revealing more of themselves to each other with each passing night. Vaughn spoke of his childhood in Missouri, his difficult relationship with his father, the pride he'd felt in his small Kansas farm. Gabriella shared stories of growing up as an only child, learning farming from her father after her mother died, her dreams of expanding the farm someday. As they opened up to each other, their feelings deepened. But the looming deadline kept them focused primarily on the wheat. Every day brought new challenges. A broken wagon wheel that needed repair, a fox that threatened their chickens, unexpected visitors from town curious about the hired hand staying at Miss Caldwell's farm. Town gossip had begun to circulate, some of it unkind. Gabriella felt the disapproving stares when she went to purchase supplies, heard the whispers about propriety and her reputation. I'm sorry, she said to Vaughn after a particularly difficult trip to town. People are talking, he shrugged. People always talk, does it bother you? She considered this. Not as much as it probably should. What matters is saving this farm and what's growing between us. His smile warmed her more than the summer sun. Then let them talk. A week before their deadline, they began final preparations for harvest. The wheat was ready, golden and heavy with grain. Vaughn had arranged for 6 men to help with the cutting and binding, and 2 wagons to transport it immediately to the mill. If the weather holds, he said as they sat on the porch the night before the harvest was to begin, we'll have it all in within 5 days. And the payment to the bank the day after, Gabriella added, leaning slightly against his shoulder. Then we can talk about the future. Vaughn took her hand, rubbing his thumb gently over her knuckles. Our future, she corrected softly. He turned to look at her, eyes shining in the lantern light. Yes, our future. The kiss they shared was filled with promise and a deepening passion that left them both yearning for more. But they separated reluctantly, aware of the crucial days ahead. After the harvest, Vaughn said, his voice husky, when your farm is secure. Gabriella nodded, though it took all her willpower to move away from him. After the harvest, morning brought clear skies and a sense of anticipation. The men Vaughn had hired arrived early, along with the Tanner brothers, who indeed remembered their debt to Gabriella's father. With 8 people working, the first day of harvest went better than expected, a large section of the field falling to their scythes and sickles. Gabriella worked alongside the men, binding sheaves and helping load the wagons. Vaughn moved throughout the field, directing operations with quiet efficiency, occasionally catching her eye with a smile that was meant for her alone. By sunset, they were exhausted but satisfied with their progress. The first wagons had already left for the mill, the wheat to be processed immediately per Vaughn's arrangement with the miller. "We're ahead of schedule," Vaughn told Gabriella as they watched the men depart. "If we maintain this pace, we'll finish with time to spare." She smiled, relief and hope washing over her. "We're really going to do this, aren't we?" "Yes," he said confidently, "we are." That night they celebrated with a simple but hearty meal, their spirits high. As Gabriella cleared the dishes, Vaughn brought out a small package he had hidden away. "I got something in town yesterday," he said, almost shyly. "A small token to mark how far we've come." Curious, Gabriella unwrapped the paper to find a delicate silver hair comb adorned with a single pearl. "Vaughn, it's beautiful," she breathed. "I noticed your old one was broken," he said. "And I wanted you to have something nice for when we go to the bank to make your payment. Something that shows you're not just surviving, but thriving." Touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift, Gabriella impulsively leaned forward and kissed him. What began as a gesture of gratitude quickly deepened into something more passionate, his arms encircling her waist as he pulled her closer. When they finally separated, both breathing heavily, Vaughn's eyes were dark with desire. "Gabriella," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Stay with me tonight," she said softly. Not in the side room. For a moment he seemed torn. "Are you certain? Your reputation is already being whispered about," she finished. "And I don't care. I know what I feel, Vaughn. I know what I want." His expression softened as he cupped her face in his hands. "And what is that? You. A future with you." The admission hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Then Vaughn kissed her again, and words became unnecessary. That night, they discovered each other in ways both tender and passionate. In Vaughn's arms, Gabriella found a connection she had never imagined possible, physical desire intertwined with deepening emotional bonds. And as they lay together afterward, her head on his chest listening to his heartbeat, she knew with certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. "I love you," he murmured into her hair, the words so quiet she almost didn't hear them. Gabriella raised her head to look at him, seeing vulnerability and certainty mingled in his gaze. "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling right and true. His smile was like the sunrise, full of promise and new beginnings. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. From dawn until dusk, they harvested wheat, the rhythm of cut, bind, and load becoming second nature to all involved. The weather remained perfect, warm days with light breezes that helped separate grain from chaff. Vaughn and Gabriella worked side by side, stealing moments of connection amidst the labor. A brush of hands as they passed tools. A shared smile across the field. The knowledge that they would fall asleep in each other's arms when the day was done. By the 4th day, 3/4 of the field had been harvested, the grain sent to the mill and processed. The first payment from the miller had already come enough to cover the wages of their hired help and begin accumulating toward the bank debt. "We're going to make it," Gabriella said that evening as they watched the last wagon of the day rumble toward town. With a day to spare, Vaughn nodded, his arm around her shoulders, never doubted it for a moment. She looked up at him skeptically. Never. A grin tugged at his lips. "Well, maybe once or twice, but not since I saw how determined you are." Their quiet celebration was interrupted by the sound of approaching riders. Vaughn tensed immediately, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun. 3 men came into view, Mr. Preston riding in front with 2 of his ranch hands flanking him. The cattle rancher was a large man with a perpetual scowl and ambitions that extended well beyond his already substantial holdings. "Miss Caldwell," he called out, bringing his horse to a stop. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Vaughn's arm around her shoulders, but he made no comment. "I see your harvest is progressing well." "It is," Gabriella replied coolly. "We'll complete it tomorrow." Preston dismounted, approaching them with a forced smile. "That's actually why I'm here." I understand you've been selling to Miller's Mill, but I'd like to make you an offer for the remainder of your crop. A better price than Miller is paying." Vaughn and Gabriella exchanged glances. A better price would help ensure they had enough for the bank payment. "Why would you offer more?" Vaughn asked directly. "You're not in the grain business." Preston's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say I appreciate quality and I've been watching your operation with interest." Something about his manner put Gabriella on edge. "We have an arrangement with Mr. Miller," she said. "He's been fair with us." "Loyalty is admirable," Preston replied, "but business is business. My offer stands until noon tomorrow. Think about it, Miss Caldwell. It could make the difference in keeping this land." After the rancher and his men departed, Vaughn's expression was troubled. "I don't trust him." "Neither do I," Gabriella agreed, "but if his price is significantly better—" "We'll ask Miller about it in the morning," Vaughn decided. "See if he knows what Preston might be planning." That night, their lovemaking had an edge of urgency, as though both needed to reaffirm their connection in the face of new uncertainty. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, Gabriella traced the outline of Vaughn's face in the moonlight. "What happens after we pay the bank?" she asked softly. "Have you thought about it?" He captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I've thought of little else. If you're amenable, I'd like to stay, help you run this farm, build something lasting, as partners." His eyes held her steadily. "As husband and wife, if you'll have me." Though they had spoken of a future together, the direct proposal still took her breath away. "Vaughn, I know it's sudden," he continued quickly. "We've known each other barely a month, but I've never been more certain of anything. I love you, Gabriella. I want to build a life with you." Tears pricked at her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." His kiss was gentle, reverent, sealing their promise to each other. Morning brought a change in the weather, dark clouds gathering on the horizon, promising rain by afternoon. They needed to work quickly to finish the harvest before the storm arrived. Vaughn rode to town first thing, both to check with Miller about Preston's offer and to bring the remaining workers for the final push. Gabriella began organizing the field, marking the sections that would be harvested first. When Vaughn returned, his expression was grim. "Miller has no idea what Preston is planning, but he's suspicious. He offered to match any price Preston gives us and suggested we be wary." Gabriella frowned. "Did he say why?" "Only that Preston has been buying up properties all around this region, some under questionable circumstances." They had no time to discuss it further as the workers arrived and the final day of harvest began. With the approaching storm adding urgency, everyone worked at a frantic pace, cutting, binding, and loading as quickly as possible. By midday, they were 3/4 finished with the remaining section. The sky had darkened ominously, and distant thunder rumbled across the plains. Preston arrived as predicted, this time alone. He offered a price for their wheat that was indeed significantly higher than Miller's, but insisted on immediate delivery to his own property rather than the mill. "I need an answer now," he said, glancing at the approaching storm. "Before that rain hits," Vaughn stepped forward. "We appreciate the offer, Mr. Preston, but we'll be continuing with our original arrangement." The rancher's face hardened. "That's not your decision to make, Quaid. This is Miss Caldwell's farm." Gabriella moved to Vaughn's side. "And Mr. Quaid speaks for both of us. Our answer is no." Preston's false civility dropped away. "You're making a mistake. That storm will be here within the hour. You'll lose what's left in the field and with it your chance to pay the bank." "We'll finish in time," Vaughn said confidently. With a sneer, Preston mounted his horse. "We'll see about that. Holloway tells me you're cutting it awfully close with that payment." After he rode off, Gabriella and Vaughn exchanged worried glances. "He knows too much about our financial situation," she said. "Which means Holloway's been talking when he shouldn't be," Vaughn replied. "Let's worry about that later. Right now, we need to beat that storm." They rejoined the harvest, working with renewed urgency. The wind began to pick up, bending the remaining wheat stalks and making their task more difficult. The first fat raindrops fell just as they were loading the final wagon. "Go," Vaughn shouted to the driver. "Get to the mill before the roads are washed out." The wagon lurched forward as the heavens opened, rain pouring down in sheets. Gabriella, Vaughn, and the remaining workers ran for the shelter of the barn, drenched within seconds. Inside, they counted wages with rain-slicked fingers, paying the men extra for their hard work and speed. As the workers departed, braving the downpour to reach town, Gabriella and Vaughn stood in the barn doorway, watching the storm lash what had been their field. "We did it," she said, a laugh bubbling up despite her sodden clothes and exhaustion. "We actually did it." Vaughn pulled her into his arms, both of them dripping wet but too elated to care. "Yes, we did. Tomorrow we'll collect the final payment from Miller and settle with the bank. And then," she said, looking up at him with shining eyes, "we can start planning our future." His kiss tasted of rain and promise, celebration and devotion. They ran through the downpour to the cabin, shedding wet clothes as soon as they were inside, kindling the fire to warm their chilled bodies. That night, their lovemaking was jubilant, a celebration of what they had accomplished together and the life they would build. As they lay before the fire afterward, wrapped in blankets and each other, Gabriella felt a contentment she had never known before. "I was so afraid when I received that eviction notice," she murmured. "I thought I would lose everything." Vaughn's arms tightened around her. "Instead, you gained a partner, and a husband soon enough." She smiled up at him. "As soon as you like," he promised. "Though we should probably wait until after we settle with the bank, just to be certain." The storm raged through the night but had passed by morning, leaving behind puddles and a washed, clean world. They rode to town together, first stopping at Miller's mill to collect the final payment for their wheat. The miller was effusive in his praise. "Finest crop I've milled this season," he told them. "And you got it in just before that deluge. Smart work." With the money securely in Vaughn's saddlebag, they made their way to the bank. Mr. Holloway's surprise was poorly concealed when they entered his office together. "Miss Caldwell," he said, rising from his desk. "Mr. Quaid, what can I do for you today?" Gabriella stepped forward, placing the payment on his desk. "We're here to settle my debt, Mr. Holloway, in full as agreed." The banker examined the money, his mouth tightening slightly. "It appears to be all in order, though I must say I'm surprised." "Preston seemed quite confident you would fall short. Did he now?" Vaughn's voice was dangerously quiet. "And why would he think that?" Holloway flushed, busying himself with counting the money again, merely an observation he made in passing. "I'm sure," Gabriella said coolly. "Now, if you'll provide me with a receipt showing the debt is paid in full, we'll be on our way." Once the transaction was complete, they stepped out into the sunshine, both feeling lighter than they had in weeks. "Free and clear," Vaughn said, squeezing her hand. "The farm is secure." "Our farm," she corrected, smiling up at him. As they walked down the main street, several townspeople stopped to congratulate them on the successful harvest. News traveled fast in small communities, and their achievement saving a farm that many had written off had clearly impressed their neighbors. Outside the general store, they ran into Mrs. Peterson, the neighbor who had originally sent Vaughn to Gabriella's farm. "I see my matchmaking worked out better than I could have hoped," the elderly woman said with a knowing smile. Gabriella blushed. "Your matchmaking," Mrs. Peterson chuckled. "When I heard you were ill and struggling, I knew just the man to send your way. Vaughn helped my brother's family last spring when their place flooded. I had a feeling you two would suit." Vaughn's eyes widened in surprise. "You never mentioned any matchmaking intentions when you told me about Miss Caldwell's situation." "Of course not," the woman replied with a wink. "You'd never have gone if I had. Men can be so stubborn about these things." They all laughed, and as they continued their errands in town, Gabriella marveled at how differently she felt compared to a month ago. Then she had been alone, ill and despairing. Now she had a secure farm, a future to look forward to, and a man she loved by her side. Their last stop was at the small church on the edge of town, where they spoke with the minister about a wedding date. 2 weeks hence, They decided time enough to prepare, but not so long that they would need to wait. As they rode home, side by side in the late afternoon sunshine, Gabriella felt a contentment she hadn't known was possible. The farm spread out before them, the harvested fields golden in the light, the cabin that would be their home visible in the distance. "What are you thinking?" Vaughn asked, noticing her smile. "That a month ago I thought I was facing the end of everything, and now I'm at the beginning." He reached across the space between their horses, taking her hand. "The beginning of our story." "Yes," she agreed, her heart full, "our story." 2 weeks later, Gabriella Caldwell became Gabriella Quaid in a simple ceremony attended by their neighbors and new friends from town. Mrs. Peterson beamed proudly from the front row, taking full credit for bringing them together. After the wedding, they returned to their farm to begin their life together officially. Vaughn carried her across the threshold of the cabin, both of them laughing as Scout barked excitedly around their feet. That night, as husband and wife, they made plans for the future. They would expand the wheat operation, add more chickens, perhaps invest in some dairy cows. Vaughn spoke of improvements to the irrigation system, while Gabriella described the vegetable garden she wanted to develop. "And children?" Vaughn asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder as they lay in bed. "Do you want them?" Gabriella smiled, placing his hand on her abdomen. "I think we may have already started that particular project." His eyes widened. "Are you certain?" "Not entirely," she admitted, "but I'm late and I've been feeling different, happy different." The joy that spread across his face was answer enough. He gathered her in his arms, holding her as though she were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you, Gabriella Quaid. And I love you, Vaughn Quaid, my unexpected savior." He shook his head. "We saved each other." As autumn turned to winter, their suspicions were confirmed. Gabriella was indeed expecting their first child. The farm prospered under their joint care, and when spring arrived, they planted an even larger wheat crop, hiring 2 permanent farmhands to help with the expanded operation. Preston made one final attempt to purchase their land, offering what seemed like a fortune. They declined without hesitation. "This isn't just land," Vaughn told the rancher firmly. "It's our home, our future, and it's not for sale at any price." On a warm July evening, almost exactly a year after Vaughn had first arrived at the farm, Gabriella gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named James after her father. Vaughn held his son with tears in his eyes, marveling at the miracle they had created together. "Did you ever imagine this?" Gabriella asked as they sat on the porch later, watching the sunset over their thriving farm, their son sleeping peacefully in Vaughn's arms. "When you first rode up that day, did you ever think we would end up here?" Vaughn considered the question seriously. "No," he admitted. "I was still running then from my past, from connecting with anyone too deeply. I came to help because that's what I did. Move on, help move on again." What changed? His eyes, so full of love it made her heart ache, met hers. "You, your strength, your determination. The way you fought for this place even when you were too sick to stand. How could I not fall in love with that?" Gabriella leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "I'm glad you stayed. I'm glad you were sick and facing eviction," he replied with a teasing smile. "Otherwise we might never have met," she laughed softly. "That's a terrible thing to be glad about." "And yet," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead, "it led to everything good in my life." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Gabriella thought about the journey that had brought them here. From despair to hope, from solitude to partnership, from a dying farm to a thriving one. Sometimes, she reflected, what seems like the end is really just the beginning. All it takes is courage, determination, and perhaps a stranger appearing exactly when you need them most. And as she sat with her husband and son, watching darkness settle over the land they had saved together, Gabriella knew that this moment, this life was everything she had ever wanted but never dared to dream possible. Their love story, born in crisis and nurtured through hard work and shared purpose, was just beginning. And like the wheat fields stretching out before them, it would continue to grow season after season, harvest after harvest, for all the years to come.